Hi, Megan.
Hi there.
I'm sitting, well, so if you're listening to this, you can't see this, but if you're watching it, I have this ginormous, incredible New Rules of Women Health book and was not expecting it to be this incredibly deep and thorough. Very impressive. So
Thank
why don't we
you.
start like at the very, very beginning? How did this book come to life?
Yeah, it's a fun story. So I have the privilege of working with Maria Shriver on her weekly newsletter. Really, it's become a digital magazine, news magazine called the Sunday Paper. And I started working for her there, writing and editing articles for the Sunday Paper. And one day over a salad in LA, she said, I really want my imprint at Penguin Random House to do a women's health book. I want it to be a manifesto. We don't have an updated book that's really a lifespan book for women that covers everything from puberty to sexual health to fertility and pregnancy through menopause and even beyond. And so she said, you've been a health journalist for 20 years and I want you to write it. And so I said, okay, Maria Shriver.
Oh, so you're like eating your salad. I imagine the lettuce flopping out of your mouth, and
Yeah.
you're just like, what? How am I even going to start this?
Yeah, Maria, she's such a fierce women's health advocate and has been for so long, and just an incredible journalist. And so Maria Shriver is very commanding, and she's also got a heart of gold. And like I often say, every nice thing you want to think about her, I have found to be true. And
Mm.
so I sort of was like, okay, yep, I'm right on top of that. Like I'm gonna get after it. And then when I really tucked in, I was like, wow, this is a project and a half. And sure enough, 3 years later,
3 years.
oh yeah, so tons of reporting and writing, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. I think when I said, "Sure, Marie Shriver, I'll go
Right.
ahead and write that book," and then
Yeah.
it was such a journey and such a fun one to really, interview more than 100 all-female experts for this book, tuck into research, and really get at what women most need to know about ourselves.
So how did you even go about scheduling those interviews? Was the imprint sort of like, yep, we're game, whatever you want to do, and we're going to help? How does from the business side, how did those get started?
It's a great question, right? Because I think a lot of people really want to write a book. I've fielded so many emails lately being like, "How did you write this? Like, how can I write my book?" So yeah, Penguin Random House, one of the world's biggest, if not the largest publisher, I believe. You go through a big process. You write a proposal. So even though Maria had essentially commissioned me to write the book for her imprint, I spent a long time on a proposal, really mapping out what I wanted this book to be, doing some research in terms of what each chapter would entail, how the book would flow. All that can change at a later date, but you really want to map it out. And then I got paired with editors once the project was a go, and then they really help you craft the
Mm.
project, figure out what you want to say, how you're going to say it, and then the reporting and the writing and the revising. I scheduled all the interviews. I really, yeah, was on Zoom for much of 2 years of my life with multiple experts, really trying to understand what I was trying to convey, really complex medical topics and translate them for a layperson.
How does one approach an expert on this? Hi, I'm writing a book. Can I interview you? Were you met generally with big yeses? Did Maria Shriver's name help? Probably.
Yeah.
How did you approach it?
Yeah, I approached it like I have approached my entire career. So I have been a health journalist. So my career started in magazines in New York City. I worked at Time Inc. and really just kind of worked my way up the masthead, so to speak. So when you are a young journalist cutting your teeth in magazine journalism, you call experts and you say, "Hi, I started my career at Parenting Magazine,
Nice.
actually." And you call up the top doctor in the space and say, "Hi, I'm Meghan Rabbitt. I'm here with fill in the blank. And I'd love 30 minutes of your time, an hour of your time to really talk about this topic." And most people, when, doctors and researchers and other healthcare practitioners, I have found to be very generous. When they talk to me, they see it as a public service. They see
Hmm.
it as me as the conduit to help get information out to the public that's really important and evidence based. And so, yes, I was met with a lot of great, let's get this scheduled.
Did you know right away that you knew right away it was about women's health for sure? Because that's what Maria wanted.
Correct. Yep. It was
Okay.
about women's health and everything from puberty through menopause. So I knew I was going to have to take a look at all the different areas of women's health.
And did you make that outline? How did you work on the like overall, system of the book? Because it is
Yeah.
clear it's a wonderful system and perfectly organized.
Thank you. Yeah, I really did. I took some space from it. You know, what you want to do at the start of a project, I have found, is take a bird's eye view. You want to kind of fly above as if you're a little drone and say, okay, what's going to go in here and what's the best way for this to really be presented to a large audience? And so I broke it out into sections, and then really each section has chapters focused on. The first section is on women's specialties, you know, things that yeah, we as women know we need to be on top of, right? It starts with puberty, sexual health through a female lens, and then things like fertility and pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum and all through breast health. And then the second section of the book is on the specialties. So what do we know about women's brains, women's hearts, women's immune systems, those kinds of things. And then in the third section, it's kind of putting it all together. It's the lifestyle aspects like exercise and nutrition, and also things like, what do we need to be aware of in this day and age where we're living in this ever-changing digital landscape where information is flying at us and misinformation. And so that was the arc of the book that I had mapped out. But trust me, things changed, things moved around. It was a lot of discussions with my editors, even with my husband on our favorite hike. Like, I don't think this chapter fits here. How is it going to
Mhm.
puzzle piece its way in the exact right spot?
What did you learn? I guess, how did your body and your mind and your heart synchronize with the writing of this book? What did you notice different things that maybe if you weren't writing the book personally, you might not have noticed?
Absolutely. You
Mm.
know, Abby, a big one is at the how's this for poetic? At the very end of researching and writing and rewriting and finishing this book, I had a hysterectomy.
Oh my.
So I have a history of uterine fibroids. And to be honest with you, as I wrote this book, as I looked back on my menstrual health history, I realized I ignored a lot of symptoms, you know, and
Mm.
I am a women's health journalist. It
Yeah.
really surprised me. I'm like, gosh, like how did I not know that this was a symptom that I should have raised a red flag about?
Wow.
And I started raising some red flags. I started really listening to my body in a new way as I wrote this book. I started believing myself. You know, I think as women, a lot of times we brush things off. We say, I'm okay. I've got so many other things going on. And I really started to clue in and said, uh-oh, I think I need to like actually pay attention to these signs my body has been giving me. And sure enough, I made multiple appointments with multiple surgeons. All signs pointed towards a hysterectomy being my best option
Hmm.
for treating the uterine fibroids, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah. I, by the way, had a emergency hysterectomy after I gave birth. So I'm a hyster sister, as we say.
I love it.
Hister sister, but and I have, I mean, I went through infertility for so long. I got my kids, and I was like, great, I don't need my uterus anymore. Great, I don't get my period again. Fine, but obviously, it can feel super traumatic. Did you feel any trauma, or did you feel empowered making that decision?
Both.
Mm,
You know, I think that when something goes wrong with our bodies, we feel like it's a betrayal. We feel like
mm,
our bodies are betraying us. It's like, how could you do this? The most natural thing to get pregnant, and here we are struggling, you know? Or the most natural thing is to have a uterus, to bleed every 28 days ish, and to then go through menopause, and you know, and so it feels like a betrayal, and that really doesn't feel good. And so to some extent, I felt like just terrified to have the procedure. I think as women, you know, I don't have kids, but I think we associate with our wombs,
sure.
right? Like this is the seat of our power as females. And so there was a process for me. But I will say, once I did wrap my head around it, I asked the right questions of the surgeons to really interview them to land on a surgeon who I felt was the exact right choice for me. And that felt really empowering, you know, to show up at those appointments and say, I know my body parts. I want to know what you're going to take, what's going to stay, what it's going to mean. And that just felt like I was taking charge in this new way for my longevity and my health and happiness over the long term. And that was amazing.
Did they leave your ovaries?
They did.
And let's rewind and then we'll go forward. But
Yeah.
you chose not to have children, and we talked briefly about this, but it's so rare to share stories of women who have a successful career, especially in women's health, who chose not to become a mother. So I'm just curious what that looked like for you and how you feel about it now. And did it sort of tug more at your heart? Like you're just saying about, yes, your womb, but specifically because you didn't have children, did you feel weirder about getting your hysterectomy?
Yeah, I think it really brought up a lot of those things you're talking about. So I chose not to have kids, but I think to some extent that decision kind of chose me as well. So I met my now husband later in life. I was in my late 30s. I had had this great career. I had been in multiple relationships that didn't work out before. I think if you asked me in my 20s if I was going to have kids, it was a no-brainer, of course.
Mhm.
I love kids. I've got nieces who are just everything to me. I would drop everything and go to them if they ever need it, you know? And I love babies. I love my kids, my friends' kids. Um, but yeah, I think at a certain point it just became like, wow, I think I'm going to have to make a decision here as to whether I'm going to work really hard to have this and or not. And my partner and I, my now husband, just said, you know, life is pretty good right now. We met later in life. If we met in our when we were 25, we probably would have kids, you
Hmm.
know. And then I guess tied to the hysterectomy, yeah, when you have your uterus taken out, your womb, you have to do some work around what that means. The fact that, you know, yeah, for years I had very regular menstrual cycles, and in a lot of ways it didn't cause me any problems, you know. And then those fibroids grew like they did in my own mother, which is super common
Hmm.
when there's a family history there. And yeah, and I had to say, gosh, okay, like you're not serving me anymore, and I think it's time to say goodbye.
Mm.
And I did a lot of work around, you know, just because my womb isn't there doesn't mean like the seat of my creativity isn't there,
Yeah.
you know. And I think there can be a lot of energetic work and mindfulness you bring when you have a big, you know, procedure like that
Hmm.
to really set a new norm for yourself.
Yeah. How did you approach that work?
Therapy. I've got a
Hmm.
great therapist, you know, so I did a lot of that. Also pelvic floor therapy.
Hmm.
So after my hysterectomy, I don't know if you did this, I had some pelvic floor therapy, and my pelvic floor therapist was an amazing like energy worker as well. So she did a big kind of Reiki style scan of my body and
Hmm.
really worked with me on a lot of like what's happening in there now that these organs are gone.
Hmm. I didn't do that until much later. But you talk a lot about pelvic floor therapy in your book. So I'm curious, like, where in your expert interviews did you feel like that was being touted as so important? Because it feels almost trendy at this point. It is so important. And in fact, I think in your book you talk about seeing a pelvic floor therapist before pregnancy, which is like so novel. I mean,
Yeah.
why don't we do that? So where did you land on that?
Yeah, that was interviewing pelvic floor therapists.
Yeah.
And the one quoted in my book said, you know, this is such an important transition in a woman's life, physically, hormonally, emotionally. Like, get an assessment if you can beforehand to find
Yeah.
out the health. What really blew me away about the pelvic floor is I think a lot of us have been taught that we just need to do our Kegels and tighten everything up. But
Right.
what she said to me, which really blew my mind, was like, actually, if you're just doing your Kegels, but your pelvic floor has too much hypertonacity, so it's already, you know, very strong, you could actually be doing more harm than good. And so what you really want is an assessment of what are your muscles doing? Are they lax and they need some extra support, or are they too tight, which could be causing other problems? So I found that pretty eye-opening.
Also, I think we don't talk about how much is tied to the pelvic floor. I mean, of course, energetically, but even physically. I mean, it affects so many different parts of your body. And that's why it's so frustrating that it's not really dealt with more or centered on more.
Yeah, and tied to so many aspects of your life, right? So it's not just if you've carried a baby or given birth vaginally, it's also your sex life,
Right.
right? Like how sex feels. And
Hmm.
even things like I noticed a connection between my pelvic floor and my diaphragm. Like after the surgery, I had a laparoscopic surgery, so I had my belly blown up with a lot of gas. My diaphragm stopped moving down, and my pelvic floor therapist said there might be a connection with your pelvic floor muscles here and how your diaphragm is like a little bit too high in your body, not moving fully.
Did you do physical work to treat that?
Yes, it was physical, energetic. So I think that's for a lot of women is a little maybe scary, you know, to be like, wait, someone's gonna have a gloved finger and put it inside of me. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's important to name with your physical
Hmm.
therapist. You know, like any practitioner, what you want to do is be able to say, "Look, I'm really nervous right now. I
Hmm.
don't I feel comfortable with you, but I'm scared," and see how that practitioner responds. I think, you know, you always want another trend with all the interviews and all the doctors I talk to for my books. Like you really want shared decision making. You want to feel like your doctor is a partner and wants to hear you so that they can ultimately help you and you can come up with decisions together that feel right.
And also present you with all the options, which isn't always how it works.
Totally.
Is there anything you learned without naming names that felt disappointing, or did you have any disappointment in any of your interviews?
Not with any of the doctors I spoke to. I think that really, by and large, the people working on women's health, and particularly the women I spoke to for the book, they are passionate about helping women. They
Hmm.
are a passionate group of researchers, clinicians who are trying to right many wrongs, which first and foremost was like the lack of research on women's bodies. For so many years, people just assumed that women are small men, essentially, with a few different parts.
Yes.
And that's just not true.
There's so many experts that have said that exact thing on this podcast. It's literally what everybody learns when they're even going through medical school because that's what the research is.
Totally. And, I think a lot of times too, these women didn't have a seat at the table. They
Right.
weren't deciding what needed to get researched because they weren't there. And now that has changed. So
Right.
we are behind. We need more research. But what I really aim to do in my book is bring up the research that we do have about how women are different than men so that at least we can work with what we do know while more research hopefully is being done.
I love that. What else was surprising besides the pelvic floor piece of it? What else did you find that was surprising?
I found so much surprising, which is surprising in and of itself to me because I have been now a health journalist for going on 25 years. So you
Yeah.
would think that I had a really good baseline. And, things like this one was very surprising to me. The clitoris,
Hmm.
we, for years and years until 2022, we're using research on cows to understand how many nerve fibers were in a clitoris. In 2022, thank goodness, an amazing urologist and a colleague of hers, Dr. Maria Uloco, said this isn't good enough. We need to study a human clitoris, and found sure enough there were more nerve endings, a lot more nerve endings.
Sure.
So I think, or nerve fibers, I should say. So I think that was really, interesting and also just surprising. Like, how are we at 2022 people and we haven't studied, I believe it is the only organ in any body that exists for pleasure.
It
Take that in.
also the I know that this is just what happens in the medical world, but being akin to a cow is so rough for me. You know what I mean?
Amen. Totally. I do. Another thing that really surprised me when it comes to female anatomy is how many of our body parts are named after men. So
Okay.
there is a group of mostly female, you will not be surprised to know, anatomists who are pushing to get rid of what's called eponyms, which are anatomical terms named after the person who claimed to have discovered the body part. And they're wanting to use toponyms instead. And so an example is the fallopian tubes. So they are actually named after an Italian priest whose last name is Fallopio. And that's how we get the term fallopian tubes. But what this group of anatomists say is like, no, they're uterine tubes. And not only is this like feminist, progressive way to talk about our bodies, but also for medical students, it cuts down on cognitive load. So if a medical student is learning the toponym, they're like, oh, well, it's a uterine tube because those are tubes connected to the uterus. So it makes studying these body parts easier for med students and remembering. So isn't that amazing?
But yes, but how did F Mr. Fallopio even get like what happened for that for them to be like did he discover the I mean what literally in that particular case do you know what happened how they were named that way?
I asked the anatomists I spoke to for my book, and a lot of them said, that was what was done. It was either the man, usually one anatomist, Amanda J. Meyer, who's amazing. She has a paper written on this saying it was usually the pale, male, and stale person, the old white man, who said either that he founded it or he just decided to lay claim. Kind of like an explorer going through our bodies, just being like,
Right.
yep, that'll be mine. I'd
I'll
like my
take
name
that.
in
I mean,
an anatomy
I
book.
can't believe that it stuck like in that particular case. That's crazy.
Yeah, isn't that wild? And then
Really.
there were other things too, that just surprised me. So, as a health journalist, I have reported on and know that heart disease is actually the number one risk for women when it comes to our mortality. Most women don't know that.
Yeah.
Most women are mostly afraid of things like breast cancer, and understandably so. These are diseases that we should be aware of and try to prevent and get screening for. But yeah, I found that interesting.
Why do you think it is that heart disease is number one?
Well, why heart disease is number one is a topic for cardiologists, right? But what I get curious about is why is our understanding of that being our risk? It's actually getting worse.
Mm,
So years ago, we actually knew that heart disease was a big risk for us, and now fewer of us know this. But the interesting thing about heart disease that really blew my mind, and what I'm trying to tell every young woman, is that this the cardiologist I spoke to for the book, preventive cardiologist, says actually your gynecologic health history has a lot to do with your future heart disease risk. So if you ever had pregnancy complications, preeclampsia, low birth weight babies, and a host of pregnancy complications, even if they cleared up after you gave birth, you should be bringing that up with your doctor to see about preventive cardiology. Because as one cardiologist, Dr. Jane Morgan, put it, pregnancy is your heart's first stress test. It
whoa.
takes a lot of work to be pregnant. And so all of the effort that your body has to go through if you have complications could be a sign that maybe your heart wasn't super robust through that process. Not to scare people, but just to keep it on your radar to say, actually, I had pregnancy complications. I think I'm fine because they cleared up. Whereas actually, no, maybe once, it's something to bring up with your general practitioner.
Mm. I wonder, is there like how do we not know? Is it lack of education? Is it lack of diagnosis? Is it lack of tracking? What do you think the biggest indicator is?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. I think for a lot of us, we're bombarded with information. So what information do we trust? The American Heart Association has been telling women heart disease is the number one killer for women for many, many years. But then maybe you're scrolling on social media, and because of what's coming into your feed, perhaps you think like, oh, no way, like breast cancer is what I have to most be
Right.
afraid of. And so I
Hmm.
think we're in an interesting place right now with a lot of information coming to us. So that's something. And I also think too, I did myself, a lot of times we ignore our own symptoms. We think, okay, that's done. I don't need to think about it anymore.
Mm,
Whereas actually, like a lot of these things, if there's a little niggling, like, oh, maybe I should talk to a doctor about it, talk to your doctor about it. That's
mm,
what a lot of the women's health practitioners I spoke to for this book said. Yeah, talk to us about these things.
mm. Do you think, let's talk to that end, like talking about advocating for yourself, because I think, especially coming from the infertility field, you have to advocate for yourself. I think most educated people at this point know that, but we didn't always. Did the doctors talk about that as well, or do you feel like it's just on the patient side of things that
No,
we're talking about it?
I think great doctors want you to advocate for yourself. All the doctors interviewed in my book say, yeah, come to me, not because they're missing something. It's just that one doctor put it really simply. She's like, you wouldn't go to your hairstylist for this drastic change without like a picture of like what you're thinking. You wouldn't go to your tax accountant just like, hey, can you help me?
Mm,
You come with your box of like your materials that, the paperwork that that person needs to help you. And so advocating for ourselves is crucial, right? But what doctors want us to do is come with what's going on, like here's what's happening for me. They also say, which I thought was a great tip, organize it in order of priority, because let's face it, like most doctors are not going to have an hour to sit there with you. So put all the things down and then at least do your homework and prioritize it so that you can go through the things that are most important. But doctors want us to advocate for ourselves. They don't want us to just sit there and say, what do you think?
mm, mm. What do you feel optimistic about after doing so much of this research?
I think we're advocating for ourselves more. I think we're living in a time where we have access to information. I think making sure it's the right information is key, and that's becoming harder and harder. And I have some tips on how to do that. I
Yeah.
think we all have to become journalists to some extent when we look at information and say, okay, how am I getting the right information? Is there an ulterior motive behind who's putting this information out? But I'm optimistic that we are, as women, we're talking about topics that used to be taboo. I mean, look at us talking about our hysterectomies on
Right.
a major podcast.
Right.
there's no way my mother's generation would ever have done that. And my
Totally.
mom's like a great, like young 70 nothing year old, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? And so
totally.
we have made progress, which feels hopeful.
Yeah, that does feel hopeful. In terms of like where the education can start, right? I mean, we always say sex ed failed us, where do we feel like the education can start to creep in? Can it creep in earlier? Is it going to be in schools, outside of schools? How can we continue to teach?
Yeah, I mean, if we could over get a way better health class where it's actually helpful for
Yeah.
us, that would be amazing. I think in lieu of that, because we don't have so much control over that, my sister has two teenage girls and she's doing an amazing job of talking to them.
Hmm.
I think it starts with educating our young girls and frankly our young boys. Don't you want
Yes.
to raise little boys and then young men who are these fierce advocates and support systems for the women in their life. And so it's really educating our young people about what things are, using accurate names, like for quote unquote down there, it's a vulva, let's call it
Hmm.
a vulva, and just start to normalize that so that they have their sort of starting point is way more than where ours was.
Totally. Um, oh shoot, I was just gonna ask you something. Oh, in terms of educating young people and puberty in general, what did you learn about puberty? And we talk a lot about how it's happening so early for people now. Why is that, and what can we do to fix it?
Yeah, there are amazing puberty experts who are diving into this, right? Because it is starting a little bit earlier these days. That's what I learned. And it just looks vastly different. I think one of my biggest takeaways after interviewing multiple puberty experts is that we can't think that our young girls are going through the same puberty that we did.
Mm,
Think about even things like period underwear exists now, but that
right,
wasn't around when I was getting my period in junior high. And
right.
so, those kinds of things are different. And I think we need to honor where our young girls are versus try to place our own stories on them. And so that was a big takeaway. Another really big takeaway is that, especially for young girls, I interviewed Peggy Orenstein, who has written these incredible books called Girls and Sex and Boys and Sex, which I feel like should be required reading for anyone with a young kid
Yes.
who's about to become sexually active, because she really takes a deep journalistic dive into what the landscape is like. And it's pretty scary for girls. What she said is that a lot of girls are like, wanting to be performative. They don't understand pleasure for their
Mm,
own sake, whereas boys are like, what are you talking about? Like, pleasure is pleasure. And I
mm,
think there's a lot more to understand and to kind of help support our girls by saying, she tells a story that I find so not funny, but it's kind of like, wow. She said to a young girl, would you ever, if you're bringing your boyfriend glasses of water whenever he's thirsty, but he never does the same for you, like, isn't that a little crazy? And this youngster was like, yeah, that wouldn't cut it. And then she was like, well, why are you giving him blowjobs all the time, but it's never being reciprocated?
mm.
And I thought that was just like, whoa, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Why? I mean, and that's a good age to start exploring that,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
even I think so. And I interviewed another amazing expert, Amy Lang, and she talks about how to have the sex talk, how to have the birds and the bees talk in a way more progressive way than probably we got it.
Yeah.
And her book is amazing. She has scripts where she really just helps parents navigate that really tricky territory. But she says even things like, I found this quite interesting, even role playing what consent looks like. We talk a lot about consent, right? And you want to make sure there's mutual consent. But like you can actually say to your husband, "Hey, I'm gonna ask if it's okay if I hug you, or if it's okay that I kiss you in front of our little kids," so that it starts to become the norm.
Mm,
And I think that's pretty powerful as well.
it is. You said you had tips in terms of self-advocacy.
Yeah.
What are your top tips?
All right. So when it comes to self-advocacy, I think the number one tip is we have to believe ourselves. We have to
Mm,
believe our own symptoms. We have to not brush them under the rug. We have to not say, ugh, no big deal.
Yeah.
We have to honor what we're feeling and give it some airtime, even if it's a little bit scary. So I think
Mm,
that's number one, that self-advocacy starts with ourselves.
mm.
I think when then we bring what's going on with us to our doctors, and the clinicians taking care of us, we have to be honest. We have to say, and again, and efficient. We have to be good storytellers. You don't want to, quote unquote, bury the lead, as we say in journalism. You want to start with, "Hey, this is going on. I'm pretty scared about it. What do you think?" Understanding that doctor appointments are getting shorter, and maybe you're going to need to schedule two appointments if you've got a long list. So I think that's really important. And then I'd say the other big thing we can do is really listen, and not only listen with our ears, but like with our hearts, to be a little bit woo about it. In that, when you're in that flimsy paper gown, like how do you feel? Do you feel like your doctor is meeting you and really wanting to hear what you're saying, and wants to be a partner in shared decision making? And listen to your gut. If you're like, I feel like I'm getting the brush off here, or I don't think this is my doctor. If you can, that might
Follow
be a
it.
sign. Follow
Yeah.
your gut and find another one.
That's such a good one. How does Maria feel about the book? Is she
Oh,
excited?
she is. She left me the sweetest voice note the other day. She was in New York at the Penguin offices, and she said, "Megan, I held your book for the first time." And
Mm.
yeah, I think she's really excited, and I really tried to make her proud with this one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It looks really good. Just in closing, I love to ask, do you have any advice that you were given or that you like to give, something that you think about often?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I feel like, another big thing for women in, let's say, their late 20s, 30s, 40s, is we can fall to the end of the to-do list. I think every woman can understand this. It's like we give to our kids, to our partners, to our work, and we're just like hard charging. And I think like what helps me feel like most like me is when I give to myself. When I say, okay, I've got a full day and I've got to start my day with these practices. I've got to get my strength training in. I've got to prep some healthy meals so my 5 p.m. Megan thanks my,
7
yesterday's
a.m.
Megan.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, when it comes to our health, man, you can't let the dog get more veterinarian appointments than you get doctor's appointments, which
Such a
really
good way to look at it.
is common, right? And I think the more we can do now when we're young, the more the payoff we'll experience later on.
I love that. Megan, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait for people to get their hands on this book. I mean, I feel like it's going to be textbook, textbook.
It's a biggie.
Ah, I
And
love
as my
it.
as my friend Beth said, gosh, there could be like a doorstop, but it'll be a pretty doorstop,
It's a
and then you
very
can
pretty,
you can pick it up when something's going on with your health, and
but
then
it's
you can
like it's easy to
solution.
read, even though it looks ginormous. It's digestible, which I love about it.
Thank you so much, Abby. I really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you.